Hey everyone, we're going to talk about a darker event that took place at home during World War II. So, as we know, Americans are going to declare war on Germany, Japan, and Italy after the Japanese attack on the Pearl Harbor naval base in Hawaii. So, what this event does is cause Americans to stop trusting their fellow citizens that happen to be Japanese Americans. They see that these people look like the people that did the attacks. They see these people as coming from Japan and may have loyalty to Japan over America. And for the most part, that simply was not true. A similar event took place in the future from that period in 2001 in 9/11 when American Muslims were thought to be terrorists or thought to be unloyal because of the 9/11 attacks, that somehow those American citizens were more loyal to a Middle Eastern country than their own country. And there was a lot of fear and hysteria over these people at that time, too. But fortunately, the US didn't make the same decision that they did during World War II, which we call Japanese internment. So here's what happens. Our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, issued an executive order, which number is 9066, Executive Order 9066. And what this order is going to do is require all Japanese Americans in the United States, and these are American citizens with Japanese ancestry, to leave their homes, to leave their jobs behind, to leave their whole life really behind, and go to an internment camp. Now, an internment camp is basically a prison camp because the word internment means the state of being confined as a prisoner, usually for political or military reasons. So they're essentially going to prison camps. Now, let me clarify something right away. These are not concentration camps. These are not where Japanese Americans are going to be tortured. This is not where they're going to work until they die. This is not going to be some kind of final solution like Hitler was doing with the Jews. This is because Americans fear the loyalty of Japanese Americans. So when they were told to go here, they're not told that they're doing anything wrong or that they had done anything wrong. They were not charged with a crime. And because they weren't charged with a crime, they didn't have to go to court. They didn't have to get a trial. They had their homes searched without warrants or probable cause. And all of these things that are listed here are against the Constitution. They are unconstitutional. You cannot be taken away or forced to go somewhere without committing a crime or without having a trial. You can't have your home searched without a warrant or probable cause. So the American government, the U.S. government, is violating people's rights, these Japanese Americans' rights. And they would have to live in places that look like this, often surrounded by barbed wire, with military guard towers around, with the military soldiers watching these people, making sure they're not escaping or up to no good inside of these internment camps. And in total, there were nearly 120,000 of these Japanese Americans who had to forcibly leave their homes and live in these places under military guard without being charged with anything, without really doing anything wrong. Most of the camps you'll see on this picture right here on this map were on the West Coast, because you can imagine that the Pacific Ocean would be over here, and what's across the Pacific Ocean? Asia. So Japanese Americans would leave and immigrate. Japanese citizens would immigrate from Japan and likely would land on the West Coast or in California and would live there. You do see there's a few others on the other side, but we get some other images of these internment camps. You were able to leave an internment camp if you passed the loyalty test. And the most important part of a loyalty test would be question 27, which is going to ask if you would be willing to be a combat soldier in the military and fight in World War II, or go as a medic or a nurse during World War II. And some would go, a lot wouldn't. And if you went, you would likely be in a segregated unit where you would fight away from the white soldiers and would likely have a more dangerous placement in the military. So you can live in an internment camp, or you can go fight and die in a war. So not great options if you wanted to leave. So let's look at a few things that were going on in these internment camps. And again, these are not concentration camps. They're where the Japanese Americans are being watched, monitored, and lived under military guard. So if we look here, they're going to school, they're playing football, they're playing baseball, they're doing the Pledge of Allegiance. So what Americans are really trying to do to these Japanese Americans is make them more American, give them more American values, Americanize them, assimilate them. The only problem is that they're already American citizens. A lot of them already are playing baseball. They're already going to American schools, learning things like U.S. history. So it really was kind of messed up to show that the U.S. did not trust these people and forced them to live in essentially re-educated when they didn't really need re-education. So here's some rights that were broken with FDR's Executive Order 9066, and make sure you remember that order. Their Fourth Amendment, again, they had their homes illegally searched and property seized. The Fifth Amendment, they weren't informed that they committed a crime, but they were still punished, which is illegal, which is unconstitutional. They had their Sixth Amendment violated because they had no trial. And they had their 14th Amendment. This is our most important one. Make sure you hear this one. They did not receive equal protection under the law. That is the 14th Amendment. Basically saying that all races, all people, sexes, whatever, are supposed to receive equal protection under the law. You can't single out a race and say this applies to you. So in this case, Japanese Americans were singled out and said you had to go to these camps, which violates the 14th Amendment. So Executive Order 9066 violates all of these. So what do you do when your rights are violated? Well, there was one Japanese American man who decided that his rights are being violated, and he was going to fight it. And his name was Fred Korematsu. Fred Korematsu was a Japanese American who really never had even been to Japan. Here he is right here. He is going to refuse to go to the internment camps after Executive Order 9066 was issued. And he's going to say, guess what? You're violating the 14th Amendment and a number of other rights. You are singling out Japanese Americans and not protecting us equally like you would at anyone else. So here's what happens, and it's not great. The Supreme Court is going to say that during a time of war, when there's a threat to national security, all people's rights, anyone's rights, can be violated. That includes your 14th Amendment, that includes your 5th Amendment, your 4th Amendment, your 6th Amendment, whatever. So they're going to set up this precedent that during a time of war or during a threat to national security, and they argue that World War II is a threat to national security, as it is, rights of citizens can be violated, like Fred Korematsu's, like the Japanese Americans. Therefore, Japanese Americans are a threat to national security, and their rights can be violated. So, it was a darker period in time. The U.S. put people behind these walls and watched them and took away their freedoms. And later on, America would apologize for this, and a lot of these Japanese Americans and their families would get reparations or payments for being illegally imprisoned. So at least they made that right. Well, hope you learned something today. Thanks, guys.